Thank you again, Hal, for having us here and being our first person to be interviewed. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming. It's quite a thrill.
So let's see. I thought we'd get started with just some questions about your personal background, just to get the story, the beginning of the story. So could you tell us where you were born and when?
I was born on a chicken farm in Petaluma, and I have a twin brother, and the two of us each gathered 1 million eggs in our lifetime there before we left that and went on to other things. And I lived there till I was about 18 when I went in the service, World War II, and then after that, college.
Oh, I didn't know you were in the service. Where were you stationed?
I was stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii on a Naval Air Station, which right now doesn't exist anymore. It's right under the Honolulu International Airport. Very disappointing to me when I went looking for my base.
Did you have any other brothers or sisters?
I had an older brother, 10 years older.
And what brought you to Martinez?
Well, I was teaching at Akalani's High School, and I later became a counselor there. And we were living out in Richmond, East Richmond Heights, and we were looking for a place closer. And someone told us about this street and this place, and I remember driving down here, and I thought, well, there's no way we can afford buying a home in this place. But it turned out that prices were way lower then, and so here we are. That's how we got here.
Okay. So you and your wife and your children?
Yes, we had one child, a year and a half old or a year old or something like that, and a little boy just newly born right after we got here, and they're both adopted.
No, what is your wife's name? And
My wife's name is Marie, and Marie Olson, and we've been married since 1956. Just over 50 years.
And what are your children's names?
I have a son named Craig, who is a fire captain in Sacramento, and a daughter named Karen, who teaches French in a high school in Maine.
What kind of work did you do? You mentioned that you were a high school counselor.
Yeah, I was a teacher for quite a few years, and then I was a counselor for 11 years at Akalani's High School.
Was the proximity of the creek any factor in choosing this home?
Yes, we were very much taken with the creek, drawn to it. In fact, when we hadn't bought it yet, we asked people for permission to go in the backyard and look, and they, of course, let us do that, and we were just very excited about it. And it was just a free-flowing creek, and we just couldn't believe it, that we could have that kind of luck.
Can you describe for me the creek behind the house, what it was like at that time when you moved in?
At the time we moved in, it was completely natural. There were no, nobody had done anything to restrict the erosion, and so it ran just free-flowing, and the banks were full of natural plants and things of that sort, and it was very beautiful. But as we know, a few floods came, and some of those banks changed their nature very fast.
Why don't you go ahead and talk about the flood, since you brought that up? That's part
well,
of history.
I wasn't here in the 50s, and around 54, 5, 6, there was the highest flood that anybody around here knows, and it flooded up to the point where it overflowed the banks and went into the field on the other side of the creek. It never, on this side of the creek, ever got up here because we fortunately were just a little bit higher. And I've seen it 13 feet deep at times, and it roars like Merced River in full water when it's that full, and it's very dangerous. I saw a full orchard tree with branches 15 feet long scraping both banks, just going right on by in one of those floods. So, and when that happens, the erosion takes place about 4 feet off the bottom of the creek, and it just tears up banks. Up on the top, it's less dangerous. It's just that intermediate area from 3 to 4 feet above the bottom of the creek where the real scouring takes place.
What did you like about the creek?
I like the peacefulness of it, the solitude of it, the fact that you see all sorts of wildlife, skunks, birds of every kind. We have a red-tailed hawk that we see frequently there. We have deer, raccoons, even one day an opossum hanging from one of the limbs across from us here. So it's just a beautiful thing.
Has that changed over the years? Any type of wildlife?
No, if anything, it's improved on wildlife in one way. If you like turkeys, it's improved. But we have a problem because they come down sometimes as many as 15 or 20 at a time. And if you're not watching, they can dig up your lawn and make it look like it's been rototilled in a little while. So that's an ongoing thing. But they don't come that often, and usually we discourage them a little bit.
What didn't you like about the creek?
The fact that it eroded so fast. There's a sharp turn right near my swimming pool out there. And in the first winter, before we had done anything in the creek, we lost 18 inches of bank right adjacent to the pool. And if we hadn't done anything, that would have undermined the entire pool within a few years. So something had to be done. So I began a several-year project 35, 40 years ago to armor the bank so that wouldn't happen. And I armored my bank and some of the bank opposite me so they wouldn't get hurt either. And so that's what I've done. And we...
What do you mean by armoring?
I would put in riprap, and you have to. I've learned about riprap. If you don't concrete it together, the flood takes it away. Practically no matter how big your piece is, it'll move it right on down the stream. So you have to grout it together, and if you once grout it together, then your problem is to have it. It'll undermine if it's on a bank. So in this case, I armored the bank and then went across and armored the bottom of the creek and then up the other side a little bit. So I've got it stopped and haven't had any damage now in some 30 years in that area right out there.
Did you have an engineer look at it, or is this all something
no,
you figured out
just
on your own?
do it as you go. Figure out what works and what doesn't work. Sometimes you learn the hard way when you build something and you haven't grouted it together and you watch it disappear down the creek, so you have to go down the creek and pick up whatever you can find and bring it back and do it over.
Let's see. Were there any spots that you particularly liked along the creek, either in your yard or anywhere along this stretch here?
Along the creek, wherever there's a large pool where it's quiet, is beautiful. There's one just past us here, and there's several on the way down toward the city, and one just upstream from us too. And those are very nice places. Those are the places that attract the deer. And we see the deer coming right from across the street, down the hill, and cross the road and go down to the creek. So it's very nice.
What was your most vivid memory of your life along the creek? Does anything particular come to mind?
Yeah. When the Army Corps of Engineers were invited in by the city to create a flood control project, a huge flood control project, and I hadn't been attending meetings or anything here, paying any attention to the city, and an attorney up the street, David Levy, he was on the Bataan Death March, a very famous man, since has passed away. He brought it to my attention, and we went down to a meeting, and the money had already been appropriated for this project, and we got up at the meeting, and David spoke and said, well, we weren't aware that we could oppose it, and made all the usual things and excuses. And the supervisors, the county supervisors then, said, all right, this project is almost ready to go, but in view of the fact that you were not aware, we can give you 1 month to get whatever protests together that you think you can get. And so David Levy was smart enough to get the assessment rolls for the entire watershed. And we got all of those rolls, and we had tables in this room running 25 feet maybe from here, clear down into the next room, and then 25 feet the other way. And we had people side by side on both sides, and we divided up the assessment rolls, and we got 49%. We needed 50%. We got 49% of the owners of the 49% of the assessed value in the entire watershed in 1 month, and went back there, and we thought we'd lost because we only had 49%. But the county supervisors were so impressed that we had 49%, they said, there's no way we're going to approve this with 49%. Now let me tell you why we opposed it. Just past our house here, 2 houses down, is John Muir's grave. And that's just on the other side of John Muir's grave was where that project was going to start. The creek was going to be widened to 150 feet from the top of one bank to the top of the other. It was going to be trapezoidal shaped and concrete, and it would go clear from there down past John Swett School, just past John Swett School, where it would enter a pipe 15 feet in diameter, big enough for a school bus to drive through, all the way to the bay. Can you imagine a kid climbing over the fence at John Swett School and falling into that high water and into that pipe? Not only that, the 150-foot stretch, in that stretch, they were going to bulldoze away 4 homes of people who had lived here for generations and just destroy their homes. So that's why we opposed it, and it was also going to disrupt the entire city, that 15-foot pipe all the way down. So we opposed it and we beat it, and that is the crowning achievement for the whole valley. And after that, David Levy was the one who did all of the deciding about how to get the assessed valuation and all of the key masterminding. But I was the one who ramrodded the people and kept them all going, and so I got elected to be the president of the association after that. Association had been sort of moribund. It was started in 1950, and very little had been done with it until that time, and so I've been the president ever since. Yeah, mostly because other people didn't want to do it, so here we are.
When did this Army Corps project, when was all this taking place?
They first dreamed up the idea in 1967, and in about 1971 was when we defeated it. Give or take 6 months, I can't remember exactly.
Okay. So was that your first really
and I should say, of course, the next time the city flooded, naturally we were being blamed for that, but the city then came up with a second Army Corps of Engineer project some years later. I don't remember exactly when, 15 or 20 years later, and they couldn't even get that passed, and that was going to be just within the city limits. So that never passed because there were too many people opposed to the damage that it was going to do. So after that, they then raised their own money and did what you see downtown, which is a very nice job of protecting the city up to maybe 5-year flood or 10-year flood. The big project was supposed to handle the creek and prevent flooding up to 100 years. But anybody with any common sense knows that no matter what size project you have down there, if you have a driving rainstorm for 3 or 4 days, right in the middle of a high tide, you're going to have flooding, and it doesn't make any difference what kind of project you have, because it'll fill the pipe up and bypass the whole thing. So here we are.
Let's see. I wanted to ask you about the sort of problems that you've had along the creek. You talked about the flooding and how it was development. Any other things?
Well, there were some interesting things along the creek that I found very fascinating. The WPA created some check dams, concrete dams approximately 5 feet high in the creek, and then the water would drop off the top of the dam and they'd build a concrete apron below it, and then the water would spill off the apron and continue. That was their means for slowing down the water and cutting down on the erosion. They built one of those in Vaca Creek, and they built another one just up from the end of this street, just up Arroyo del Hombre Creek. Alhambra Creek becomes Arroyo del Hombre at that point. And there's one there, about 400 yards up from the road. You can't see it. You have to go up the creek to get to it. And there it is.
Check dams effective in doing what?
Well, I guess they were for a while, but some of them, the water managed to get around the sides of them and bypass and cut through. And the one in Vaca Creek, that happened. And one of the neighbors out there got a hold of the federal government and complained about their structure that was failing. And believe it or not, he got them to come in and repair it. So they were effective, I guess, to a certain extent. But I wasn't here when all that was going on. That was back in the 30s.
Okay.
And you asked another question about what had been happening along the creek. Not so much along the creek as in the valley. There have been a lot of projects that we didn't think were very good for the environment. And we managed to oppose those and stop them. For example, on the corner of Elise Valley Road, as you go up here to the T where the tree farm is and turn toward Lafayette, the first sharp turn where you come to right up at the base of that hill, Semi Construction, I think that was from Pittsburgh or somewhere like that, had proposed to build a 7-story building on that spot. I know it sounds ridiculous. It didn't take us long to defeat that, but we did defeat that. At a later time, I don't have the dates on all these things, but 5 or so years later, on top of what is now Mount Wanda, the Buddhists were going to put a temple up there. And we didn't think that shining, glittering Buddhist temple would look too good for the environment. So we opposed that, and they, combination of our opposing it and their deciding that someplace else was better, it disappeared. What else can I think of?
Sounds like you're an early environmentalist.
Right.
Do you think of yourself as an environmentalist?
Yes, I think so. Trying to maintain the valley and the way it is. One thing that is more or less current, the security owners are going to build a 23-lot subdivision right at the T, the Release Valley Road, Alhambra Valley Road T. And we asked for it, demanded, and got an EIR on that. And then we went to all the meetings and did all the talking and so on. We managed to see to it that all the homes along the road are going to be 1-story homes, so as not to have them looming up 2 stories high and blocking the view from the road of the hills. Mm-hmm. So that means all of the 2-story homes that are in there will be behind the phalanx of the first row of homes. So we managed to get that. And they also were going to destroy a heritage oak right at their entrance, which is right by Quail Hollow. And we managed to save that heritage tree by passing petitions out to all sorts of people, and we did that. And
by we, you mean
the association.
Alhambra Valley
Yeah.
Association.
The way it works, the Alhambra Valley Association has maybe 15 or 20 or 30 active members at all times. But when you get into something like this tree farm development, then we had, it just expands dramatically. So maybe 100 people suddenly become interested. And so there's a cycles go with it.
Are there any other issues surrounding the tree farm development going on right now? You mentioned the height of the houses.
Yeah. The one concern that people still have is that they're taking the drain water out of that subdivision, taking it down the road to Wanda Way, and going just inside the entrance of Wanda Way, and then dumping it into a creek, and aiming it straight at the fellow who owns the property on the other side of the creek. They're doing all sorts of things about protecting the bank where Wanda Way is. So far as I know, they have done nothing, absolutely nothing, to protect that fellow when this water comes straight in and creates a turmoil. And
well, I wanted to ask you about that because there has been a lot of work along Alhambra Valley Road. They put in sewer lines, didn't they?
Yeah, they put in the sewer line from the T down to Wanda Way. And they've put the sewer line in from the general area of the school down there up to the park area where John Muir's grave is. But they need to get the permission from the federal government to go through that John Muir's grave area with this sewer line. And that means a federal permit, and they're very difficult. I'm told by the developers many times more difficult than the ordinary permits are. And they still haven't got their permits. They've been struggling away with it for a couple of years now. The latest the latest estimate is that sometime this summer, they say June, I would say look more toward October or August or something of that sort, because something keeps coming up and delaying them and delaying them and delaying them. But when they finally get that permit, they're going to take the sewer line right down this street. When they get to the creek, they're going to dig a 25-foot deep pit, about 10 by 10 or something of that sort, on one side, and same on the other side of the creek. They're going to take the line down and then drill sideways underneath the bottom of the creek, well under the bottom of the creek, and come up the other side, so they will not disturb the creek in any way. And I'm sure that requirement is because of John Muir's grave, because they would, if they tried to put a sewer line with anything that was showing within the side of John Muir's grave, the whole of America would be upset.
So. Has that project been approved? I mean, the design of it, apart from the
yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's just that they have to get a permit. They don't have it yet.
Okay, and some of that land is city land and some is county.
It's all in the county, the sewer, except where they hook onto the sewer. That part is in the city, and that would be right adjacent to John Sweat School.
Okay.
But all the rest of this is county.
Okay. about the creek again. You mentioned flooding and erosion. I know some parts of the creek there in the past were problems with trash. And
yeah, that's encouraging. When I first moved here, the creek was just full of trash all along. And when we defeated the Army Corps of Engineers project back in 1971, the city was in a big creek cleanup, and we, having defeated the flood control project, felt it incumbent upon to help. So we, meaning I and all of our neighbors, took out 5 dump truck loads of trash just from the length of Wanda Way down to the school. And I think the city took 7 dump truck loads of trash in their part of it. So ever since that's happened, we out here apparently have learned the lesson. So you see almost nothing in the creek now except an occasional limb that drops off a tree. But we used to see washing machines and every kind of thing imaginable. But it's very encouraging.
How about the vegetation along the creek? Have you noticed any change in that over the years, whether there were invasive species or non-native species?
No, there's a lot of ivy that's been planted and vinca that's been planted, and those, I guess, could be considered invasive species. But other than that, I haven't seen anything. The same amount of poison oak still is there. And you could go out to this deck and look across. I can point it out to you. It's on the other side of the creek, may I assure you. I took care of that.
How about your neighborhood? Has that changed much over the years?
Very little. There have been very few places more to develop along here. There is a development proposed up on top of this hill right opposite us, which is called the Alhambra Hills development. And they're proposing to build 114, I think it's 114, homes up there. And we had a specific plan that we created for that Alhambra Hills, and the association, some of us went down to all those meetings for 3 years, almost 4 years, to create the Alhambra Hills specific plan. And the same thing happened for the Alhambra Valley specific plan. We went to meetings to get that created for about 4 years. And the reason that we did that was because at one point the county approved some open space. They allowed somebody to build several 5-acre parcels, and then above those 5-acre parcels, because they were allowing them to have the 2 or 3 parcels below it, they dedicated the open space for 5 acres above it. He came back later, and somebody who knew a lot of people down in the county went, and they went ahead and allowed development in that open space above those homes. And that, of course, angered us, and that's exactly why the John Muir, or the Martinez Land Trust was created, now called the Muir Heritage Land Trust, because we knew if the land trust got the rights to that land, it wouldn't be developed ever for eternity. So that's why it was created, and several of us on the board were in the John Muir Land Trust. I was the first chairman, and Mary Ann Gaby was, I think, the treasurer. In any event, she was in it right from the start. And the one thing that I did for the land trust, which is more important than anything else I did, I got a hold of Hewlett Hornbeck, who was the man who did all the acquisition of land for the East Bay Regional Parks. He's an attorney, lives over in Muir Oaks. And I knew he would be invaluable to be on that board because of his knowledge about acquiring land. So I went over and talked to him and asked him to join, and he turned me down. And so I just said, Hewlett, are you going to tell me that you're going to let us do all the hard work, and then you're going to come in and horn in at the end for part of the credit? He said, okay, I'll join. So, and it turned out to be true, because he was more instrumental in furthering that thing along than anyone except Tina Batt, who was the marvelous person who started the whole thing and used to live in the valley out here just after you make the turn in what's called the Pear Orchard area opposite Vaca Creek Road. So she was fantastic, and that's how we got in the land trust.
Now, can you clarify what your first project was then? Which piece of property you were talking
With the land trust? Mm-hmm. The first project was to get the development rights in Stonehurst deeded to the land trust so that nobody can build anything in the open space. We went to meetings for quite a while with Stonehurst, and they preceded the specific plan, but because of our efforts, And because that's what the Stonehurst people wanted to do, get all the buildings, instead of each on 5-acre parcels and with fences all over the landscape, cookie cutter type thing, they agreed to put all those homes down on 1-acre parcels or less in a cluster in the middle and keep, I'm sorry I can't remember, but more than 100 acres of open space. So we've got the development rights to that open space, and let me tell you, they will not put so much as a woodshed on any of it, and we have nothing to do with maintaining it or anything of that sort, but we do have the right to prevent them from building anything on it. So that's how the Land Trust got started. First big project.
Something that you mentioned was about the development in the valley and how by preventing the connection to the
oh yes, sewers and their leach lines have been the main constraint for development in the valley, because in order for you to have a home and to develop it here, you have to have enough space to build the leach lines. And they used to let you just build one leach line next to your house, and that was fine. But nowadays they want double leach lines, one full system that can be used, and if that starts to clog up, you should have the means to change to a second full system of leach lines while the first one repairs itself over time. And that's the way they have it now. So this leach line and septic tank determined how many homes could be built. They just were restricted in the space that they could find to do that, and the higher you got on the hills, the tougher it got for leach lines. So that's why we fought so many years to prevent those sewers from going in, because as soon as they go in, then development becomes much more easy, as it will when time goes by. The other constraint, of course, is the fact that nowadays if you hook into that sewer, it's like $30,000 or more. So it's a lot of money, and a lot of times people think there's nothing but wealthy people out here, but I can tell you right now, I've got 3 or 4 single ladies who are retired and they have limited income, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them.
Would people be required to hook up to this?
No, they've got a requirement. That is to say, the Central Sanitary District has finally agreed with Busby of Security Owners to provide him a sewer from the T down to the school. And they fronted the whole amount of money to do that. I think it's over $2 million to build the trunk line, just the main trunk line from there to the school. And they agreed to pay the whole amount of money. Therefore, nobody could protest, because this is America. If you have money and you want to buy a sewer line, you can buy a sewer line. So that means the sewer goes through. Once the sewer goes through, there is a law that says if you have any trouble with your septic tank, and they are the determiners of what the trouble is, it could be just something as one board on top of your sewage tank that could be replaced with another board, but whatever they choose to say, if you're within 300 feet of it, you have to join. So once that trunk line is through, everybody next to it is now in jeopardy, and they better not have any trouble with their septic system, or they'll have to join. And of course, now it's 30,000. Suppose 5-10 years goes by and they have to join 40, 50,000, who knows? It keeps going up.
So are you anticipating a lot of development in the valley once this...
Yes, already you see a lot up here, straight across from us. There are 2 lots, one of which is developable, and it does not percolate for leach lines. So they've never been able to develop, but already people they got a sign out. You'll see it as you leave. They're trying to sell this lot. They're way overpriced on the lot, but they're trying to sell the lot. And of course, once the sewer line is in, they'll be able to do it. They will have to pay quite an expense to get the sewer line all the way up there from the street, and they also will have to meet the fire road specifications, which usually are your driveway has to be 16 feet wide. And in that steep area up there, that could get very expensive, because you'd have to build a retaining wall in order to get it 16 feet wide. So that's just one example. There's another lot down at the end of the street that has sat without development all these years, and somebody's already bought it, and a speculator is going to develop it. So everywhere, any open space you see that is not already owned by someone who refuses is going to be filled in. And so it'll just it'll probably develop maybe twice as fast as it used to.
Have the neighbors generally been in agreement over the years?
Yeah, the first time a sewer was proposed that I remember was about 35 years ago. We had a meeting down at Don Sweat School. There were about 100 people there, and they took a vote. And there was one guy, I remember his name, Mr. Mullins, was opposing the sewer, and there was one vote for the sewer. and 99 or whatever that percent is for the rest. And over the years, it's always been at least 80% against the sewers for the reasons that I've already explained. And but now here we are. We're going to have sewers, at least in this part of the valley.
Do you think that's going to affect the water quality in the creek or
no,
problems?
I don't think so. The water quality has remained the same. The water quality in this creek is the same as it is in all the creeks in the county. And we've been through this. We've tested the water and all that. There are a lot of people who would like to say the septic tanks are contaminating it, but there's little evidence of it. Here and there you'll see somebody putting wash water directly into the creek. And those have been reported. And that's something that surprises me. The county does nothing about that. But nevertheless, there's only like 1 or 2 places like that. But the sewer, I would think, would make it less contaminated, theoretically, unless something goes wrong with that place where they're going under the creek. I kind of doubt it. They're going to really build that heavily, so I doubt that would happen.
Okay. There was a recent flood downtown on New Year's. Did you have any thoughts on that in terms of the just the status of the creek? And
well, the thing about downtown, AVIA has been a member of the the Alhambra Creek study plan to create a Alhambra Creek drainage plan, and we've done that. And the problem with downtown, and it's never going to change unless they jack up every building down there, because it's in a floodplain. That's what used to, before there were any houses, that's where the creek overflowed its banks, and all that is a floodplain, and that'll never change. So they could build this project, which they did downtown, and avoid the flooding in maybe a 5-year flood or a 10-year flood. But when you get to a 25-year or higher, it's going to flood, and there's nothing that can be done. And it'll be that way forever unless they jack up the buildings, which they could have done a long time ago for less money than they've wasted on all these other plans.
Okay. There have been other community efforts over the years to protect the watershed. One thing we heard about was a woman at the waterfront, and another Friends of Alhambra Creek, and then creek cleanups. Are you familiar with any of those other?
Yeah, the Friends of Alhambra Creek have been in the watershed plan from the start, and they're a very marvelous organization. They are totally environmentally minded, and they do a lot of really good work. We have a lot of respect for them. One thing we haven't touched on is the efforts by the city to annex Alhambra Valley. And the reason that we don't want to annex Alhambra Valley is simple. The city, I should start at the beginning. Let me go back to the beginning. Back in about 1940, water was introduced into the valley in Sheridan Lane area. And the city people told the Sheridan Lane residents if they would build a 2-inch water pipe and extend it from wherever the water was out on Alhambra Avenue someplace into Sheridan Lane, that they would then grant water to them, and they would also repay them the cost of building that line, that water line, over a period of time. So the residents said great, and they put up all their money. It was fairly hard to get. Boy, back in 1940, money was dear. But they did it. They built the water line. The city made one payment for the water line, and then doubled the water rates for the people outside the city. The city has always felt that if they use the water as a weapon, either threatening to withhold it or something in that nature, that they could force people to join the city, and of course that sort of thing doesn't work. That was the first thing that happened. Then we went to water rate study committee meetings downtown, AVIA, for an entire year, arguing that the city does not have the right to charge extra water rates. We argued for a whole year, and the city finally agreed after the city attorney quoted some laws saying they had the right to do this. But we went to the law library at the behest of David Levy again, and we found out that the cases that were cited by the city were from Grandview, Washington, and another place up in Washington. And the reason that they were charging extra water rates up there for people outside the city up there was providing school services, fire services, police services, and I don't know what other kind of service. The city provides absolutely no service in Alhambra Valley except for the water, and the water is paid for by the users. Which brings us to the law on the subject. The law says, the city law, that water must be serviced to the users at the lowest possible cost. A user is a user, whether he's in the city or out of the city. So they don't have the right really to charge extra rates. About 3-4 years ago they tried it again to charge extra rates, and we just went down there and quoted the law to them again, and they backed out. So right now we got it, that long argument, we got it to the point where they were charging only 50% extra, and then for some reason unexplainable to me, about 15 years ago the city just changed it so everybody pays the same, and they've been the same ever since. But they're doing other things with the water. For example, now if you want to build a home in the valley, anywhere in the valley, you have to agree to sign a deferred annexation agreement, which means that you don't get the water unless you sign it. Therefore, it's like legal blackmail or something. If you sign the pre-annexation agreement, meaning that when it comes time to annex, you will not oppose annexation, then you get water. So that's their one way of trying to force the issue step by step. Another time they tried piecemeal annexation. They went down Sheridan Lane, and they found a little corner down there, and they were going to try to annex just that corner, 3 or 4 homes. And that appears, that sort of battle appears in front of the Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO. They have all the decisions on that. The city went down and presented their reasons, and at the time, I've been in front of LAFCO several times, never ever won anything. It's just, I just said, forget it, I'm not even going. I just stayed home, and God bless her, Ruth Newman lived over on Sheridan Lane. She went down there all by herself. And she was able to point out to LAFCO that the city's reasons for doing this were not the environmental ones they were saying, but they were merely trying to acquiesce, grab property, and so on and so forth. Anyway, she proved that they were both frivolous and deceptive, and LAFCO turned them down, and she won the whole thing all by herself. God bless her. That's a marvelous victory.
Looking at questions about all of these efforts that you have been involved in, and their impact on both protecting the watershed and also an awareness of the environment among other people.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the impact of some of your
activities? People who have lived here a long time give us credit with all these efforts that we have made for slowing it down a little bit. When there were sewers here, the sewers were the ones that were doing most of the slowing down. But we get credit for opposing here and opposing there. And on most of these battles where people are trying for a variance, and the variance saying that you have to have a full-size lot. So we win those kind. They have to have a full-size lot. But when they start side variances and back variances and front variances and all sorts of different variances, we oppose them along with mobile homes when they're introduced. We've lost every mobile home valley we ever tried to oppose that was proposed in the valley. And even when they come up for renewal, we've lost those. So we don't by any chance win them all, but maybe we get credit for a 5 or 10% slowdown in development with all those efforts that we made. But whatever little bit we can do, we have done.
Have you seen a change in the awareness of environment and importance of that over the years?
Yes, I think so, especially with this business of keeping the creek clean out here. I don't know about in the city. I only one time walked through the whole creek back at the time of the Army Engineer Corps project, inspecting all that creek. But and I noticed they take trash out every year, so they have more of a trash problem than we do. But out here, it's pretty well clean. We had one crazy thing that happened right after the Army Engineer Corps project. We were trying to keep the creek clean, and the city was cleaning the creek, and so I went through with the city, and we helped throw all the debris out of the creek. We hauled it up, and they provided dump trucks and hauled it away. And we had the whole creek completely clean, all the way from the bay to where John Sweat School is, where the county starts. And of course we had ours already cleaned. And I got home and somebody called me up and said, hey, there are 50 tires in the creek in a big pond right down behind where Goodyear Tire is now. And I said, you got to be kidding. I went down there, and sure enough, they had a bunch of used tires, and they just threw them all in the creek. So I went in there and I said, boy, how would you like a negative campaign about your business? I'll be happy to run you right out of business if you keep this kind of thing up. I said, we had that thing cleaned, and we'll give you 24 hours to get those things out of there. Well, I can't do that. I'm running a business. I said, okay, I'll provide the manpower. At the time, the going laboring wage for young guys was something like $5 an hour. I should have asked for 15, but I asked for 7, and they took it. And of course, we had 2 guys out here who were just thrilled and went down and pulled all the tires out again. So that's a crazy story.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about either your work or just the creek and life in the valley here?
No, except that we are concerned about the amount of development that's going to take place. We will, of course, oppose any lot splits if we can, but the pressure for dividing lots, anybody who's got a couple of acres where he's got a house in such a position where he couldn't build another one, will certainly try to divide that up and develop the other one, and so on. So we're concerned about that, but the quality of the people along the creek seems to remain the same. It's interesting now, when I first moved in here we were all young, we all had kids and they're all raised now, but now we've got young people moving in. We got a fireman at the end of the street, a fireman next to him, a policeman opposite him, another policeman down where David Levy used to live. Those 2 guys are both 6'6", and they have kids, and they're just built like Greek gods. They're just amazing people.
Harold, what about the pre-zoning?
Oh yes, the pre-zoning. The city, for some unexplainable reason, without ever letting us know, 20 years ago or so, when they created the pre-annexation, deferred annexation agreements, they also pre-zoned all of Alhambra Valley for when they would eventually take over, which they, I suppose, someday eventually will. The zoning right now, as you leave the flat part of the valley and go toward the slopes of the hills, is 5-acre minimum with the county. You can't build a home unless you have 5 acres. And that'll still be true until pressures develop because of the sewers or something, but the sewers don't go that far out. They only go to the T, so it's not going to affect that very much. But what they did there was pre-zone all of Alhambra Valley to 2.5 acres, which means that the minute the city annexes the valley, the density can be doubled. So that proves that, and on another, they'll ask us, they want to annex us, and they'll say, well, we'll give better roads. And we say, yeah, we'll just go out just past Release Valley Road on the way to Lafayette and look at all the torn up road and the landsliding and everything else. As you drive through here, you'll see all good roads where the county is. The minute you hit the city part, the roads are just completely torn up. But the biggest thorn in the side is that pre-zoning, where they never notified us that they were going to do it. They just did it, and there's not much we can do about it, except that if and when they try to annex us, we'll of course bring it up. Maybe we could get them to change it, but I sure doubt it with the pressures that be.
So the pre-zoning is something that the city
did on their own. Which means the minute they take over, we're now going to have 2.5 acre zoning instead of 5 acre zoning.
Would that be 2.5 acres minimum, or is this an
minimum?
Average sort of
Minimum, yeah. And as you go up into the hills, you can't get much lower than that, because if you cut it up into 100 city lots, you'd be having landslides and everything else would be happening. So, but that's what they've done. We're not too pleased about it.
Do you have anything else to say about the land trust or your...
Yes, I remained on the land trust for 7 years, approximately 7 years, and I was the chairman. And as the land trust grew and grew, many people, new people got on it, people with expertise in all sorts of different areas, and it became more and more complicated to the point where you almost had to be a lawyer to follow what was going on. And at that point, I just said, you better get somebody else here. I'm pretty good for chairing a meeting and keeping the meeting going, but you need somebody else that's really into getting block grants and that sort of thing. So now they have really, really good people on that land trust, and hats off to them.
What about your work with the Housing and Community Development Advisory?
Oh yeah, I was appointed by Supervisor Nancy Fadden to be on the Housing and Community Development Advisory Committee something like 20 years ago, and I was on that for 7 years. That organization gets money from HUD, Housing Housing Development. It's federal money, and it isn't much money. Let's say they get something like $4 million to be divided through 21 low and moderate income neighborhoods. So if you're on that committee, you have to decide which poor neighborhood, which really needs this development badly, gets what part of it, and which one gets none. So you sit up there and just piecemeal and give and take, and after about a year's worth of argument, you finally get a plan together that's balanced, and everybody in every low-income neighborhood gets some good out of it. And the one thing that I did manage to accomplish that I'm very pleased about, I never asked for anything for Martinez at any time, although others did put a few dollars into that big hotel that's on the corner of Main Street. I forgot the name of that hotel, but it was in bad shape, and the organization committed some money for that. But on Morello Road, students going to school had to walk under the train tracks, and there was no shoulder at all under the train tracks. So little elementary school kids were risking their lives trying to walk to school. So I did manage to get a culvert made under the train tracks for a sidewalk for the students, so they didn't have to face that danger anymore. So I'm very pleased about that.
Is that one of your favorite accomplishments?
Yeah, my only accomplishment.
No. I don't think so. Anything else you'd like to tell us about? Maybe
No.
over the years?
I did a lot of... What was that?
Any favorite stories?
Oh, well, not stories exactly, but I did when I was at Acalanes High School. I got into announcing in athletics, so I announced all of the football games for 17 years and all of the track meets for 28 years. So I met a lot of students from all over the county that way. It was fun doing that kind of thing. But I think that pretty much tells you where I'm coming from.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
In favor of that big Army Engineer Corps project, and was very vociferous in his arguments. I lived out in Virginia Hills, and I ran into him 20 years later, and he just walked up to me and said, "You were right." So, it makes you feel good.
It does. You don't know at the time
Yeah.
sometimes about your efforts.
Okay. Well, one of the guys that you're going to see, I guess you'd have to call him an activist since he's been on the association all these years, but he hasn't been the lead, is Tom Griffin. He is now 93 or 4, and he was raised in this valley. So he remembers John Sweat, and he remembers John Muir, and he remembers all sorts of things, and can talk about floods that went clear across the road and were rowboats to the high school and on and on and on. Very interesting.